And now with only 27 days to go, oh thank God, to the referendum, campaigning is ramped up from both sides. The Yes campaign is out door knocking, and so too is the No case. In fact, Johannes Leek, a great friend of this program, drew a little cartoon of that happening there with some terrible white supremacists for the No campaign out knocking on some white lovies' doors. There you see Jacinta Price, Warren Mundine, and our next guest, Anthony Dillon. Anthony, it is great pleasure to welcome you here on the set here, taking a break from No campaigning there, as Johannes Leek brilliantly illustrated it. I want to start out by talking about how the Yes campaign is absolutely in fight back mode. They have launched a new ad. Let's have a little look at this here.
Will I grow up in a country that hears my voice? Will I live as long as other Australians? Will I get to go to a good school? Will I be able to learn my people's language? Will I be seen beyond the sports field, recognised by the decision makers of our country? Yes makes it possible.
Anthony Dillon, I want to get your reaction to this new ad. For me, I think, well, you're an Australian citizen. You've got the same abilities to have all of those things happen as everybody else. But tell me, am I just wrong here?
No, they have the same opportunities. Here in Australia, it doesn't matter where you are, there is always an Aussie there to lend a helping hand. And everyone who's made it in this country has made it because someone's lent them a helping hand. And Indigenous people are no different. And, you know, we see today, we've got plenty of Indigenous leaders before the Yes campaign who are doing so well. We have a Minister for Indigenous Affairs, we have Jacinta, we have many, many Indigenous people making it and leading the way in this country.
And in all sorts of areas. And, you know, one of the things that we hear so much about, Anthony, about the No campaign, you have the left all saying, oh, well, they're based on misinformation. But it seems to me there's a big piece of misinformation in that ad right there, because what Anthony Albanese keeps telling us is the Voice is only an advisory body. It has no power to change anything. So how are we supposed to reconcile that it's only advisory and yet it's going to change the world?
Yeah, absolutely. It would seem contradictory. And these are reasonable questions people should be asking.
Liz.
Do you find, I mean, obviously that's a very emotional ad. They've gone for the heartstrings there.
And deliberately so.
Deliberately so. But do you find that Indigenous Aussies actually think that way? Because obviously the answer to every single one of those questions in my book is yes. Like, you can if you want to, kid. It's called self-determination. You've got every opportunity here. Do you find most Indigenous Aussies, would they be on that, of that understanding, basically, that yes, we are so much less provided for, etc. and so on, we need more help?
Well, it would seem the ones who are very well provided for, like the architects of the Voice, think that way.
Right.
And there's the great contradiction.
Yeah, they're the richest.
Yeah.
They're richest in the pack.
Absolutely. But if you go just speak to the average Indigenous person, they have access to, now that's not denying we have pockets of disadvantage.
Sure.
And they certainly need help, but they don't need the Voice. What they need is what helped the architects of the Voice. And we all know what that is.
Sure.
You know, education, employment, opportunities to modern services, that sort of thing.
Anthony, I want to get your thoughts on that ad, because it strikes me as a little dangerous in that it's set up to provide discouragement and disillusionment for Indigenous people. You've got a little Aboriginal boy saying, am I going to live as long as other Australians? And clearly the inference is that if we vote no, he won't. But if we vote yes, there's nothing in the Voice to suggest that it's going to make any difference to his lifespan either. So both ways, aren't they setting up Indigenous people for discouragement and ultimately disillusionment?
Absolutely. Look, it's the same game as when you tell Indigenous people, until we acknowledge the past, we can't move forward. Or with all this racism, we can't move forward. Because then you've got people thinking, well, might as well not do anything because racism holds me back. Or my past hasn't been acknowledged enough. Absolute nonsense. Again, we have many, many, many good examples of Indigenous people making it in this country. Not only just making it, but also leading the way. And, you know, in that ad, there's a lot of emotion. And, you know, we can joke about and laugh about it, but unfortunately, emotion will get some people voting yes.
This is the thing that I wanted to ask about, Anthony, because, I mean, people like us and people watching this program, we are intimately aware of and have been, discussing and talking about and diving into, this debate for months, if not, the more than a year since Anthony Albanese said, I'm going to bring in the Uluru Statement, voice treaty truth down at the Bankstown Canterbury Leagues Club on election night. I mean, that was when I first started diving into this. But there's still a lot of undecided people out there, people who are not, have not swung in one way or the other. How do you think this is going to affect the opinion polls if they do a full blitz with this ad?
Okay. It will play on the minds of some of them for sure, and that's why the No campaign, the No camp, have got to be out there as well, in the media, out there door to door, giving sensible, big picture type messages. And when I say big picture, to let them know, hey, Indigenous people already have a voice. They have the same voice as you and I. Letting them know that sort of thing. And that, by voting no, we're not against Indigenous people. We're actually for Indigenous people. We just don't want to layer them with yet another bureaucratic layer that's, it's like plaque in the arteries. It's just going to clog up everything.
Liz?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So you would say that for those that you've spoken to, or would you say you mainly mix with people on your side of the debate?
There's a bias there, of course, with the people that I hang around with. Yeah.
Sure. But the Yes campaigners that you've met, they genuinely believe that this is going to make a difference.
Some of them genuinely believe it. Some of them have probably got vested interests.
Right. And some of those vested interests would seem to me, it was interesting. I spent a bit of time yesterday morning up at Balmoral Beach, and I observed some No campaigners who were up there handing out for the No campaign. And I saw quite a bit more support up there in that very sort of teal part of town than I would have expected for the No campaign. But the Yes campaigners, there were some people who were abusing some of the No people on the street and quite virulently. And it seemed to me that much of it seemed to be not so much about concern for the people that were supposed to be helping, but about maintaining their own self-regard.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people do have a bit of vested interest in this.
I want to ask your reaction. We mentioned this just before the break too, Anthony. This phenomenal piece from Jeffrey Robertson, the barrister in London, out of London, and he said, well, if Australia votes no, then our international standing will go down. We won't be able to criticize countries like China for human rights abuses. What do you make of this sort of argument, Anthony Dillon, that Australia's global reputation and our ability to talk to countries like China, who are actually enslaving and committing genocide against their minority populations, it's pretty offensive, I would say, to compare Australia to Chinese Communist mainland China.
It is, and it might go down for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It'll be that quick.
James?
I want to ask you, Anthony, about these two conflicting emotions, right? So at the moment, you've got Anthony Albanese used the last session of Parliament this week to talk about the referendum is all about love, so he's invoking emotion. You've got this young boy who we'd all be sympathetic to saying, I just want to be able to live, the same as other Australians. And yet, we've also now got this rhetoric of racism and charges of bigotry that are being thrown around by Marshall Langton and other people like that. So tell me, what's the emotion that the No campaign can use? We can argue principle, but is there an emotion that the No campaign can use as well? Because you said, emotion does work. What's the emotion that the No campaign should be appealing to?
Well, emotion should always work in tandem with the head, thinking things. But if there was to be an emotion, if you were to hitch onto an emotion, justice, that, we want everything fair, we want to also acknowledge the good stuff that has been happening, and we want to replicate that. And that makes Australia a better Australia, when we replicate the good stuff that's already happening.
Anthony Dillon, thank you so much for joining us. A lot to run in the next 27 days, so I'm sure we'll be speaking again. Thank you so much, Anthony Dillon.